Good afternoon and welcome to the 68th Annual Charles Eaton Burch Memorial Lecture. Our guests today are award-winning authors, screenwriters, and educators, Tanana Reeve and Stephen Barnes, who will be talking to us about how Black horror can heal Black trauma. The Burch Lecture is a celebration of several kinds. Named after Charles Eaton Burch, the lecture celebrates the legacy of scholarship and creativity produced in the African American tradition generally, and here at Howard University particularly. Professor Charles Burch joined the Department of English at Howard in the early 1920s, and in 1923, he introduced English 44, quote, an intensive study of American literature dealing with Negro life and character, a course that would further evolve under the guidance of Professor Sterling Allen Brown. Thus, the Burch Lecture celebrates both Professor Charles Eaton Burch and the larger legacy of the Department of English at Howard University, in which he played such an important and integral part. It is important to note that this year's Burch Lecture was the brainchild of Dr. Gregory Jerome Hampton, who is chairing the Burch Lecture Committee at the time of his sudden passing in November of 2019. Professor Hampton was a scholar of African American literature with a passion for science fiction, an expert on the work of Octavia Butler and founding member of the Octavia Butler Literary Society. His first book was entitled Changing Bodies in the Fiction of Octavia Butler, Slaves, Aliens, and Vampires. And his second book was entitled Imagining Slaves and Robots in Literature, Film, and Popular Culture, Reinventing Yesterday's Slave with Tomorrow's Robot. A third book, co-edited by Dr. Hampton, The Bloomsbury Handbook to Octavia E. Butler, was published 3 months after his death and includes personal thoughts from today's keynote speakers, Tanana Reeve and Stephen Barnes. A beloved teacher and mentor, Dr. Hampton was also a fan of Tanana Reeve and Stephen Barnes. And to honor Dr. Hampton's memory and passion, we celebrate his life, his humor, and his spirit with today's lecture. So again, I welcome you to the 68th Annual Charles Eaton Burch Memorial Lecture and ask that you help me welcome our distinguished guests who join the legacy of Professor Burch and Professor Hampton. A welcome to Howard is a welcome home. So we say to Tanana Reeve and Stephen Barnes, welcome home. With that, I turn the program over to Professor Patricia Elam Walker, Chair of the 2021 Burch Lecture Committee, who will introduce our acclaimed keynote speakers.
Thank you so much, Dr. DeGoo. Good afternoon. I'm excited and honored to introduce our Burch speakers. But first, I want to tell you a little bit more about our journey to today. As Dr. DeGoo mentioned, in November 2019, our beloved Dr. Greg Hampton chaired the Burch Committee, of which I was a member. He sent an email to us asking for 2020 speaker suggestions, but also letting us know his choice was Tanana Reeve or Stephen Barnes. A short time after that, as we know, Dr. Hampton sadly passed away. I took over as chair of the committee and we all agreed to honor his desire. We connected with Tanana Reeve and lined everything up, the date, the flight, the venue, refreshments, etc. And then COVID hit. And we had to cancel the lecture for that year. That was the first time we had to do so, at least in my years at Howard. But for 2021, we started planning early as we knew it would be virtual. And as with many things COVID related, we discovered there was a benefit. Since we no longer had to pay airfare, we could fulfill Dr. Hampton's wildest dream of having both Tanana Reeve and Stephen Barnes as speakers for this event. We are thrilled to make that dream a reality today. Let me thank the committee, Dr. DeGoo, Ms. Hardy, and Mr. Sajid, who made it all possible. Now on to the presenters. I'm only giving you snippets from their massive bios, but you can read the full ones in your program. Tanana Reeve is an award-winning author who teaches at UCLA. She is also an executive producer on the documentary Horror Noir, a leading voice in Black speculative fiction for more than 20 years. She has won an American Book Award, an NAACP Image Award, and a British Fantasy Award. She is the author of many books, including a memoir with her mother, civil rights activist Patricia Stephens Dew, entitled Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights. Stephen Barnes is a New York Times bestselling author, screenwriter, and educator who has written more than 30 science fiction, fantasy, and horror novels. Also an NAACP award winner, he has written for Showtime and numerous television shows. He has been nominated for Hugo, Nebula, and Cable Ace Awards. He has taught at Seattle University, hosted a radio show, and been a columnist for Black Belt magazine, as he holds 3 Black Belts. The couple, Barnes and Dew, are also married, collaborated to write A Small Town for season 2 of The Twilight Zone and episodes in Cereal Box's Black Panther, Sins of the King. They live with their son, Jason, and 2 cats in California. Please join me in a warm welcome for our 2021 Burch Lecturers, Tanana Reeve Dew and Stephen Barnes, and their presentation, How Black Horror Can Heal Black Trauma.
Thank you so much for that introduction. You really literally had me in tears.
Yeah, it was good.
Thinking about Dr. Hampton, and we're so moved that we were both choices that he would have liked to see as lecturers for the Burch Lecture. We are deeply, deeply honored by this invitation. And all of that history from Howard and Dr. Burch and Dr. Hampton, everybody, and we were there in person, I think in 2004 with Octavia Butler and Nalo Hopkinson for a program. So this is a virtual visit, but it is not our first visit, and we are so excited to be here. I think we want to begin with a reading. You know, sometimes we do reading at the end.
I don't know, we can either start with a reading or we can provide some context first.
Okay.
However, I would be willing to, if you'd like to start with a reading, I'd be willing to do that.
You know, yeah. Well, let's do a little bit of context. And for that, I would like to go to the presentation that we have made for you about horror and trauma. When you look at just this image from Lovecraft Country, the monsters haven't shown up yet. This is just an image of Black people alone on a road near sundown in the pilot episode, which I believe is called Sundown, and harkens back to my mother's memory warnings about driving alone on Southern roads when I was in college. Oh, Mom, I'm old enough to drive. And some of you probably have parents who feel the same way because of historical trauma and also contemporary trauma that our parents and grandparents have our fears for us. And I believe that my journey to horror was informed by my mother's trauma and her experiences on these very same darkened roads.
I think that one of the first things that we should do before you can talk about Black horror or Black trauma, you first have to define what horror is and what causes trauma in the first place, and why horror might have some relationship to that. Horror, I would say, is any literature, film, whatever, whose dominant emotion is one of fear. That's the dominant purpose of it, to trigger fear in the audience. Sometimes they leave you in that fear. I mean, there are movies that have a very down ending, and the other movies where there is triumph over that fear. But in either case, what you're doing is you're tapping into things, and it's usually something that the audience is going to feel themselves. So it's going to relate to survival, it's going to relate to power, it's going to relate to sex. Those are the most primal emotions that are pretty much universal. So the problem that we have there, then Black horror then would be film, television, stories, books that relate to the specific fears and interests that Black people have, or that feature Black people. One of the changes that has happened, and this is relatively recent, is that instead of you having white filmmakers making movies in which white people, there might be a Black person, often sacrificial, or they're dealing with Black people as the villain, Candyman, okay? And the film centers on the white gaze, centers on the white experience of this. What has happened over the last 5, 10 years, is Black people taking control of those images and centering themselves in these stories, which enables them to begin to ask the questions, well, what are the fears that we have? Who are we? What is the world that we see? What is it that we need in order to thrive and survive? Because if horror and fantasy in general and film and fiction in general has functioned not just as entertainment, but I think to modify the emotions of the audience such that they can live their lives with greater integrity and joy. What do we need?
Obviously, not everybody will like horror, period. You know, so if you don't like horror, that's okay. Some people prefer to exorcise, as in a demon, their stress through comedy or through romance and other kinds of films. So there's no obligation to enjoy horror. But for me, it was sort of my creative language, having been raised by my late mother, Patricia Stevens Dew. I'll put her slide up again, who was arrested several times in the 1960s. This is actually a picture of her being arrested in 1963 that Stacey Abrams recently pinned on her Twitter. I don't know if it's still pinned, but this was my mother, the woman in the dark glasses, being arrested after a protest to desegregate movie theaters, right? So it's always, and she was tear gassed. That's why she's wearing the dark glasses. It's because from the time she was 20 years old, she had sensitivity to any light, even indoors, and wore dark glasses the whole time I knew her. In fact, her dark glasses are in the Florida archives as part of her civil rights legacy. And I wish I had had the chance to talk to Mom about how horror helped her deal with trauma and stress, because it's only been since she passed away in 2012 that I realized, oh, I think that's what was going on. I think it wasn't just she liked horror the way I did as a kid, like, ooh, wee, it's scary, but it was that it really tapped into real fears and helped her extract that fear out of her body, because stress has an impact on the body as well as on our emotions and our mental state. Visualize it on the screen as something you can either run away from or even vanquish, beat it sometimes, or even just survive. Sometimes that's the point. And that imagery of vampires and werewolves and monsters fed something in my mother. And as Steve was saying, you know, for many years, Black characters, especially in horror movies, had these very sort of tropey roles. We'd be the sacrifice. There's the joke about the Black person being the first person to die. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that and even seen that. You're the sacrificial Negro, they call you. You stand between the white characters in danger for no apparent reason.
Well, you basically, so you die heroically so that they can avenge you. They raise their own game. You know, I will, you know, oh my God, they killed Sambo. You know,
I will avenge you.
I will avenge you. That's right. By grab Thor's hammer.
Or in the movie The Green Mile, this sort of feeling of moral, how would you describe elevation?
That's the spiritual guide.
Yeah, there's a spiritual guide that gives you sort of a feeling of moral elevation because you witnessed their story.
Well, or even more specifically, they helped you. Yeah. Remember that John Coffey in Green Mile had magical powers of healing, and he helped to, you know, bring a mouse back from the dead and heal Tom Hanks's wife and so forth. But they let him die. They knew he was innocent, but did nothing to try to save his life. He existed only to ennoble and elevate Tom Hanks. He had no being in and of himself. He had no desire to live himself.
An even worse example is in the adaptation. And by the way, in The Green Mile, that was not how Stephen King wrote the book. In the book, they did try to save the Black character. And also in this classic adaptation of Stephen King, The Shining, the character played by Scatman Crothers, who you can barely see because he's getting axed as soon as he walks through the door, survives the novel. And unfortunately, Stanley Kubrick, in creating this adaptation, made him a sacrificial Negro and also a spiritual guide, because he was giving the child Danny spiritual advice. And those tropes have been so comfortable for white horror audiences for so long that we made a whole documentary about it called Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. It's on Shudder if you haven't seen it, which really goes through sort of examples of how throughout cinematic history we have been misused and used as tropes in horror films. Now, I've been publishing Black horror since 1995. My first novel was The Between. I have a novel after that called My Soul to Keep. And I had a little bit of interest from Hollywood here and there. I've been very blessed that I've been in and out of option for like going on 25, 30 years for some of these books, but haven't gotten anything on the screen until 2020, when Steve and I co-wrote an episode of The Twilight Zone at Jordan Peele's personal invitation. That's what it took.
So what are you looking at here? I think that if you remove specificity about black and white, let's say that if you are of tribe A, you're not going to feel comfortable with tribe B being as elevated as you. Everybody wants to believe that they're the center of the universe. So it feels very natural. Well, of course the heroes are white and somebody had to die. So, why not? Are you saying that people don't die? I mean, it's very corrupt in that sense, and it's extraordinarily self-serving. And what was required, the reason that things have started changing, is because of a genius named Jordan Peele. I think that it's perfectly possible and legitimate to say that there is a Hollywood before Jordan Peele and there was a Hollywood after Jordan Peele, because what you have is this guy who had been observing the racial scene in America all his life, biracial himself. So he has that sense of, where do I belong? Where do I fit? Who can I trust? Who really cares about me? And then he was a world-class comedian. In comedy is the art of generating and then releasing tension. So horror and comedy are very, very close together, close enough that somebody with the kind of vision that Jordan has was able to take a personal fear of his, that sense of, are there any real allies? Is there anyone I can trust, even the person I'm sleeping with? And then create a horror movie out of it that was capable of generating tension, but then relieving the tension exactly when he wanted to with laughter. That movie that was made for about $8 million.
No, $4.5 million.
It was $4.5 million. Okay, made for $4.5 million, earned $250 million. In terms of return on investment, it is one of the most successful films ever made. And you better believe that Hollywood sat up and said, "What? What's going on here? That kind of money is possible?"
So that speaks to why, Steve and I, and in addition to a lot of other horror creators, are having not just a renaissance, but a moment we've never experienced before, where we are literally working on 2 potential TV pilots. We're working on a Black horror feature script. We're working on a Black horror short film script. All under contract, all under deadline, and I'm not trying to flex. I'm trying to say we've never experienced anything like this.
No, although it is clear that there are a lot of people who are working in Hollywood and writing books, so forth. One famous science fiction writer made the comment: 90% of everything is crap. Evolution demands a lot of death. That out of a billion sperm, one makes it to the egg, right? Most of the people who are coming through the door right now are not going to be able to have sustained careers. However, some of them will.
And this is where audience education is important, because I hope I'm not cutting
No, go
audience education is very important, because while it's true that, we like what we like there's a movie called The Devil's Rejects. I didn't like it. It's like, it wasn't for me. I'm not saying we shouldn't have any more movies like this. And that's sort of the difference. I think Black horror audiences, we're thrilled to get the recognition. I loved Get Out. I loved Us. Lovecraft Country, especially the pilot, I thought was such a fantastic rendering of how real life horror can blend with the supernatural, which makes me feel more seen as someone who has experienced real life racism. As someone who has experienced fear for my life, when you see it up on the screen, it validates that experience. And if your characters can be heroic and overcome those monsters, one of the reasons I write horror is that I want to extract the strength of my characters who didn't know there were demons. They didn't know there was a ghost in the house, but they learn it in the course of my story. They gather the tools they need, they gather the courage they need, and whether or not they win, they stand up.
And that's all cultures create story. There are a couple of different things that happen in all cultures. First, they create a religious mythology that places them at the center of the universe. Every culture has the belief God made us first and loves us best. But they also create stories of heroes and heroines for their children, because those stories, and Campbell's model of the hero's journey, roughly speaking, you have a young man or young woman who's confronted with a challenge. They reject it initially, then they're forced or allowed to accept it. They go out on the road of trials during which they meet allies and gain powers. They have their initial confrontation with evil in which they are defeated, which throws them into the dark night of the soul. The way through the dark night of the soul is called the leap of faith. There's always faith in one of three things: faith in yourself, faith in your companions, or faith in a higher power. If you take the leap of faith, then you confront evil again, and this time you succeed. And the last step is the student becomes the teacher, or the movement to the higher level, or the return to the village with the elixir, whatever it is it's going to be. But what you're doing is the old people of the village are telling the young people of the village, this is what your life is going to be. That every time you try to move from one level to another, you're going to run into your ego, push back from the outside world to the inside world. And this is your way through it. And these stories exist in every culture all over the world through all recorded time. You can turn on television 24/7. People are giving their kids this information because it is critical. But that information has not been for us. We were not the heroes of this information. We were the facilitators to help white kids,
the water carriers,
succeed, or we were the villains.
Yes, okay? So, like Candyman, the original.
So what we have here is, I think, in the 21st century, for the very first time, all of the work, all of the incredible work that all of our ancestors and all the earlier filmmakers and writers and so forth led to a Jordan Peele, led to Black Panther, okay, led to you fail enough until the geniuses arise. 99% of your people are going to go down in flames, but that 1% can change the world. So I know that I look forward to these conversations because my assumption is always that one of the people listening to this is somebody who's going to change the world. And if I were you, I'd be sitting out there thinking, that's me. Yeah, that's going to be me. So I'm talking to you.
Those of you who are artists or scholars,
yes.
The scholarship about Black horror right now is very important because, back in the day, even Octavia E. Butler would not have been considered a serious topic for discussion in scholarly essays. Dr. Robin Armin's Coleman, who wrote the book Horror Noir, a century of the history of Blacks in cinema and horror, couldn't even use that to try to get tenure when she was working on it because her department chair didn't think it was a worthy enough topic. That has changed rapidly. A lot more scholars are publishing and a lot more artists are having the chance to tell their stories. Now, back to this question of audience education, though, I'm sure out there in that audience, you can think in the past year or two of a Black-led or Black-written or directed horror project that you did not like. I'm not going to name names from the Black creators.
Okay, all right.
I'm not going to name names from the Black creators. One of them I haven't even seen because I heard it was very violent and it kind of scared me. Okay, and that's saying a lot. You hear the bad buzz, and sometimes bad buzz can kill a project even if it doesn't deserve to be killed.
What's a bad project we can mention?
Well, I will say this. One of the things that has happened because of this trend of Black horror is that Hollywood is trying to jump on the bandwagon. And when that happens, they bypass the Black creators. They go to the friends they're used to working with, someone who's already had a movie made, and they say, hey, why don't we just make this character Black in the lead? That happened in a film called Ma, which came out from Blumhouse. Now, listen, no shade at all to Octavia Spencer.
Nothing but love for her.
I get why she took the role. She got a chance to be a lead. That's huge. But unfortunately, that screenplay was written by Taylor Hackford, who wrote The Help. So that makes a red flag go off in my mind.
So what you have is a movie with a Black lead that was made for white audiences.
Yeah, she
is the monster.
She's the monster. I mean, granted, when the script was written, she was not written Black, but that can open a whole can of worms. So you have a Black woman basically in isolation, and there's a very explicit depiction of her being sexually assaulted in a dark closet while a bunch of white kids laugh about it, which is the thing that springs her sort of revenge motive, is that but when you make it a Black woman surrounded by nothing but white kids, you're making a racial statement that you are not really prepared to unpack and you are not prepared to process.
Yeah.
And as a Black woman in the audience, I was horrified for all the wrong reasons by this film.
All art is a matter of communication. Say that art is self-expression, expression of the deep self. How do you see the world? There are two basic questions in art or philosophy. Who am I and what is true? So art is, I have this initial creative impulse, this powerful feeling. I will then gain the tools that I need, the craft, which is the language that enables me to communicate this strong feeling that I have to the audience. In dance, it's certain postures. In art, it's certain visual things and plays of color and shadow and composition. In language, in fiction, it's a combination of language and imagery and structure. And if you do this, then the feeling that I have while I create it is going to be picked up on and experienced by the person who's watching it. To the degree that that happens, I have created a successful piece of art. If a lot of people do that, feel that and like that feeling, then I have created a commercially successful piece of art. And Hollywood, it has to spend millions of dollars even on a tiny movie, is all about what is the commercially successful art. These are not bad people. They're smart people, but they're limited people. They're limited by their own frame of reference. Even if they're your allies, they're limited by their own frame of reference.
Right. So in this era, I see it as sort of a very delicate time. I'm very, very excited about the growth of Black horror, even the new Saw movie starring Chris Rock.
That's right, and Sam Jackson.
And Samuel L. Jackson. I don't think it's just that they have Black faces in that film. From what I've seen in that trailer, especially as they deal with policing, I feel like it has a Black sensibility, And in terms of Black horror, you can run the gamut from racism is the monster, which is what Jordan Peele did with Get Out, which is what you see a lot of in Lovecraft Country, which is also seems to be a big part of the upcoming series Them on Amazon, where racism is the monster, or at least opens the door to the monster. You have stories where race doesn't really seem to have much impact on the story, and you're trying to talk about another issue.
Like class in Us. Jordan Peele's Us is about class. Get Out is about race.
There are moments of isolation. I think he made it very clear that this is a family in isolation, and isolation by itself is scary. But that wasn't the point of Us, the way it was the point with Get Out. And then you have other films where, honestly, it is just a miracle that there happens to be a Black lead. And in the case of, like, say, a movie like The Girl with All the Gifts, right, they found this child through the audition process. She wasn't written to be biracial, but it worked out great because the author had already embedded social messaging in the story so that it fit. Like when the movie opens and she's in Prison Orange, it's like, oh, snap, this is a statement about mass incarceration, because he was already trying to make some statements in the writing of that book, and it works. But when you haven't given it the thought, you're just trying to make the buck. I'm especially annoyed with this trend of trying to fix bad movies or bad scripts by white screenwriters while bypassing Black screenwriters. So I want to say to you audience members, be patient with Black horror as it evolves. Don't find yourself in social media saying, I hate Black horror, it's just so trauma porn. Because ask yourself, is that really true? Or is it that maybe you're not a horror fan? White supremacy is such a deeply embedded experience for us as African Americans that it is sometimes difficult for Black horror creators to escape wanting to use racism as the monster, like Rusty Cundiff did in Tales from the Hood in the 90s, long before Get Out, or like W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, you've read about W.E.B. Du Bois in your African American studies classes, and you know that he was an anti-lynching advocate, and he founded the Crisis magazine and was one of the co-founders of the NAACP. But did you know that he wrote science fiction and horror stories? There's one story from 1920 called The Comet, which is about a post-apocalyptic event. A comet wipes out pretty much everyone in New York City. The only survivors are a Black man and a white woman. And that is a racism is the monster story. Why? Because over the course of the story, while they're a little bit wary of each other, when they think they're the only survivors, all they see is their humanity. They are the last two survivors. They are going to have to repopulate. They are seeing a man and a woman, not a Black man and a white woman. But as soon as the white power structure shows up, as soon as her father finds her, you hear words like, did he try to touch you or lynch him? And all that noise of white supremacy takes over at the end of the story. And Du Bois was trying to show us, isn't this silly? Isn't this silly when we're all people, that this is what happens?
So you'll notice that it's The Comet by W.E.B. Du Bois. You'll notice that same thematic popped up in The World of Flesh and the Devil with Harry Belafonte and Inger Stevens.
In the 50s.
I believe in the 50s. And they brought in a white guy to provide the balance so that the audience is not dealing with the discomfort in that entire thing. And there was another movie by Lena Wertmüller, Swept Away, that dealt with the exact same concept, or very similar concept, only using class, with a wealthy woman and a poor man, both white, marooned on an island, and the difference in their class stops making any difference. All they see then is each other's humanity. So we will eventually get back around to the question of creation of art, but I think that you can tell that part of what we're saying is have a powerful creative impulse, have something you want to say, dig into your own emotions, and find out what is it that you would be willing to expend, days of your life that you'll never get back, or weeks or years.
If it's a novel, years.
That's right, to put out there. Then you gather the skills to do it. Then you take a look and see, where is the audience that can conceivably reward me enough that I can keep a roof over my head long enough to sustain a career. All these are the kinds of things you have to think about it anytime you see somebody like Jordan Peele or the other people who are making it all the way, who've made it all the way to the top. And make no mistake, Hollywood is the world's premier storytelling machine. It is the premier dream machine. People come from all over the world trying to get into Hollywood. The people who've managed to make it there have accomplished something slightly miraculous.
And you do have to be vigilant. When you're just writing a short story that's your pure heart, just for yourself, no one else is looking at it but you sell it, some people like it, that's your pure vision. When you're working in Hollywood, you have your producer who has sort of an idea of what they think the story should be. They might start shifting it more toward familiar imagery, gang imagery, like the same recycled images that they think. When they think of Black people, what do they think of? They start to try to sort of corrupt you with that image. And as you go higher up the food chain, when people are worried, are we going to lose our shirts on this movie? People want to be different, but also the same, right? So a lot of tropes can pop up. You can lose your way. You can be seduced by the money. You can add gratuitous violence against Black bodies that white audiences can feel sort of ennobled by. Like Steve was saying, we will avenge you, or, oh, this is horrible. But your poor Black audiences members are watching this thinking about Mike Brown or thinking about George Floyd, and it's not enjoyable. It's not entertainment to watch violence against Black bodies, sometimes in the same way. So as a Black horror creator, that's something I'm very mindful of now, is how am I treating Black bodies? When the violence is there, what does the violence accomplish? Is there vindication? Is there redemption at the end of the story? These are all questions that I think about when I'm creating.
And if you're trying to do something where you're asking somebody to hand over millions of dollars to make it for you, you have to be able to say, who's the audience? Who am I serving? In a lot of ways, I see storytelling and writing as being less important than garbage collection. The reason I say that is that there have been a number of times when Hollywood went on strike for over a year and nobody even basically noticed. But if the garbage collectors go out on strike for 6 weeks, that's the gestation period for rats. They've got to resolve it. So artists have the right to stay in that sort of kid space, the dreamer space, where we're doing this thing we love doing, as long as we are providing real value to the people who are really keeping society going, the people who are cleaning the streets, teaching our children, keeping things safe. What are you doing for them? How, do you care about their lives, about how they feel? You have to create realistic people. You have to create a world that actually mirrors what it is that you see. You have to tell the truth about how you see the world, not just try to be clever in there. It's asked, what is the truth of this scene? What is the truth of this character to the limit of your capacity? And if you do that, now you're cooking with gas. Now you're actually you're expressing yourself. This is the realm of art. Otherwise, it's just craft. There's nothing wrong with craft. I have written stories where I needed the money, somebody paid me. I mean, I wrote 4 episodes of Baywatch, and trust me, most of that was just craft. But
I thought you were going to say something else. No,
no, I was going to say that.
Not you, of course.
The show, they knew that they had tripped across a formula. They knew that they had done something lucky. They did not mistake what they were doing for Macbeth. Okay. But there was still the responsibility to try to do something of meaning. You try to do, and they had a hard time doing that. So when we talk about these things, you'll notice that all of these things, the question of who the audience is, who you are, what is the purpose of this, can underlie as you, if you know, the simplest thing, if you want to learn how to write a script, watch a movie every week while you're reading the script to the movie. I mean, seriously, just do that. Get a copy. There are websites where you can get scripts, watch a movie every week, Saturday night, movie night, read the script while you're watching. Within 1 year, you'll know a huge amount more than most people who've been through formal screenwriting programs. You'll really understand. You'll have created that link. We'll give another pattern with some powerful suggestions later on if people want that. But if one of the reasons why there is a study that says that people in hospital waiting rooms whose loved ones are very sick or dying, who read fiction while they're out there, deal with the stress better. Fiction enables us to take the fears that are inside us and put it outside us so we can look at it. That's why therapists get you to talk about your experience. As long as it's banging around inside your head, it affects you and you're not even paying attention. But if I can put it out there, I am afraid of this, I'm afraid of that. And you not only get to have the cathartic experience while you're watching the movie, but you get to develop a shared social language. When Get Out came out, it triggered water cooler conversations. White people and Black people talking about, you know, is there anyone I can trust? Can we ever be trusted? What do we need to do to be good allies? How do I tell where they're allies? Must I stay within my own community? Is there any way to tell who the people are who I can love, who I can befriend? This is real talk.
And then real discussions. His follow-up, us, is just sort of shining a light on humanity, right? He very consciously cast dark-skinned actors as the leads. He wanted a family where everybody looked like they belonged in a family together. He was very conscious about that. There were some moments of isolation, but mostly it's to ask us as the audience members to engage with our own privilege, because we are the people living on the top. We are your college students, your educators, we're artists. We are living above ground.
Yeah.
We have we also have our doppelgangers who never had a chance, who never had the nurturing I had from my parents, who told me who supported me in being an artist, even though they are civil rights activists, because they understood the importance of art. We never went hungry. We had a house, we had a roof, and especially now in this post-pandemic period. And I'm not to imply that some of you students, I know some of you students are struggling and have family members who are also struggling. But even so, we have to engage with that question of what it means to have this privilege and how we use our privilege, and how we do tend to look at people as either us or them.
Now, because when we said that it was about social class more than race, because I could have cast us with white actors and much of the movie would have been exactly the same. There was an additional level of resonance and some good evil fun in what he did there. But the idea of crabs in a basket, of, you know, if you leave your community, are you betraying them? You know, will people who, you know, it's the, you know, if you try to lose weight and you're on a diet, suddenly your friends will start bringing over cake. You know, it isn't that they hate you, it's that they're afraid of losing you, that they want you to be part of their community. You're leaving. And the same thing that's successful. You see rappers who become really successful and they have posses. They bring the neighborhood with them if they can, so that they have somebody around them who sees them. They don't just see the product. And that's one of the things that happens as you get successful, that the company you work for will see you as a product, but they'll try to get you to see them as family. They will dump you the instant they don't have a use for you, but they want you to have that familiar feeling. So you're going to work late and come in on weekends, and you're going to prioritize them above your children because, you know, this is the company. We're all a big family. No, you have to know who your people are. And that is not just racial. It's your friends, the people who really care about you. You know, you can have people have the same questions across gender lines. You know, can men trust women? Can women trust men? Everybody out there is dealing with fear. You know, everybody alive feels alone and afraid. The only question is, what are you doing with your loneliness and your fear? And what kind of story do you try to sell the world about it? If you can tell the truth about how you feel isolated, about where you feel afraid, you have all the energy in the world you need for art. But don't leave it there. The other side of it has to be, what do you love? What brings you joy? Because it is possible to create horror stories that just mire themselves in the muck, and it's just awful, and humanity is just being fed to the machine, and it's just terrible. But the most successful horror writers are Stephen King's and so forth and so on.
The Tanana Reeve dudes.
The Tanana Reeve dudes, that's right. You know, for all of whatever personal flaws they may have, they also know what you love. So when they put what you love at risk, you care. You have to. If you are in denial of that, all you have is special effects and wet makeup.
So this is such an important moment in the development of Black horror. Hollywood and publishers are discovering us in a new way. New artists are getting chances to raise their voices, and the audience is starting to have some reactions. There's been a little bit of a backlash. Some of the projects aren't as good as other projects. Some of the projects do seem to truck a little bit too much with violence against Black bodies without enough redemption on the other side. So we'll have to be patient, all of us as audience members, while we give artists a chance, because our stories, some of them will absolutely be. The excerpt I'm going to read is based on a real life incident. And I'll explain it right before I read it, but it is sort of a racism as the monster kind of approach to a story. Not every horror story will be that. Someone was mentioning a film called Spell, which is set in Appalachia, which doesn't have to do with confronting race. Also, Eve's Bayou from the 1990s, starring Samuel L. Jackson, is a story where the horror is in the household. I mean, maybe you can hint that the pressures of white supremacy are part of what create these problems, but it's really a story about a family dealing with their personal family horrors. And we will be all over the place. Sometimes it's enough just to exist and survive in a horror story, and it has nothing to do with race. Sometimes it will be directly about race and trying to visualize racism as a monster that you can face, because you know what it's like. It's like something that's just in the air that you breathe. You don't even know where it's coming from, but before you know it, the school is trying to suspend your 5-year-old kindergartner on the last day of school. True story. When I volunteered in that classroom every week, they had to pick up a phone. Last day of school, pick up your son. They suspended him because he threw over a chair. Now, that's the kind of stuff that we as parents, we as people are dealing with. And sometimes a well-placed horror story can make that feel better.
But we also need stories where racism is not that, especially external racism, because we are far more than that. I mean, if you want to quantify the cost of racism, all you have to do is look at differential statistics on infant mortality, lifespan, inherited wealth, and incarceration. You can actually quantify what the cost has been as far as I'm concerned. But within that, families still love, have children, we work, we do this, we do that. And as time goes on, although it's useful to be able to discuss those issues, those are not as much the primary determinants of our lives the way it was for our grandparents. You know, for my father, who was a backup singer for Nat King Cole, and could perform in hotels where he could not walk through the front door in Las Vegas, he was living a very different life than mine. If I don't acknowledge that, I'm stuck in the past and I'm dishonoring my father. So I want to on these things. But if you ask yourself the question, like I said, if there are two basic questions: who am I? What is it to be a human being? And what is true? What is the world that those human beings inhabit? Whatever you think the percentages are, your work should probably reflect that. If you think that racism is the absolute most important thing in the world, then that's going to come out in your work, and you will probably find an audience of people who will agree with you. I think it is one of a number of factors that most of what we're dealing with is the question, what does it take for a human being to succeed, to find love, to be a healthy animal, to feel safe walking down the street? What are those things? And I think that when you connect that with just core humanity, you're also serving the tribe in the sense of helping people understand how to take that hero's journey within the tribe, and then exterior to the tribe, white people looking at this and saying, oh, they're just like us.
But, or us realizing that we are just, human beings, outside of whiteness, that we have our own experiences, our own lives. The beautiful thing is that there are so many different artists that different artists can have different points of view,
Sure.
different takes. Not everybody has to fight the same battles, right? So here's what I'd like to do with the rest of the time.
Go for it.
I would like us to read our excerpts. We have some excerpts. I think Steve is going to read a whole story because it's very short.
Very short.
We're going to read some of our Black horror to you, and then we are going to discuss, for those of you who are creators, some tips for how you might create your own horror stories, right? Using some of the principles we've talked about. And that should take us to the Q&A. So we'll have time to do the reading and a little bit of a lecture on writing, and then the Q&A.
And my good lady wife may go first.
So this is a story I wrote called Last Stop on Route 9. I published a short story by that name in college, but the characters were white. Yeah, you heard me right. When I was in college, I had been so trained to so-called canon that I had stopped writing the Black characters I was writing when I was younger, and I was writing white characters. So I have repurposed that title, Last Stop on Route 9, for a story that is blackety black. And it's based on an experience that Steve and I had. We were actually it was the day of my mother's funeral, actually, and we got lost in the middle of nowhere. And we were going to stop and ask directions, but we realized it was a compound and there was a big Confederate flag flying on a pole, like a big Confederate flag. So we were like, maybe we want to ask for directions here. So this short story is about a young woman in her 20s who has her young nephew with her, and they are also lost. They've passed through a bank of fog, and she wants to stop and ask someone at the house for directions. Charlotte rarely missed a hashtag. So she knew what sometimes happened when Black people knocked on strangers' doors, only to be met by gunfire. She still remembered a Black woman's name, Renisha McBride, and there were others, but she also wasn't going to let fear rule her life. It was broad daylight. She was lost. She was dressed for church. She would be fine. Charlotte didn't want to block the cabin's driveway, so she veered slightly to the right of it, a few yards from the house's door, parking beneath an old oak tree that looked a century old. Something crunched beneath her tires, the sound of bad news. Damn it, had she damaged the car? She turned off the engine, and the insect songs grew louder. As Charlotte opened her car door, Kai grabbed her wrist. Wait, don't you feel it? Feel what, sweetie? He stared at her, earnest, trying to choose words. His grip was a vise. It feels mad, like everything is pissed off. When she squinted, trying to make sense of what he'd said, Kai sighed and let her go. I can't explain. My dad says you can't always explain. Lock up behind me. I'll be right back. When Charlotte closed the car door behind her, Kai hit the electric lock right away. The humidity felt soupy, and her armpits pricked with sweat as soon as she stepped outside. In a way, maybe the air did feel pissed off. She wanted to laugh at Kai, but she couldn't. And it was smart to leave Kai in the car, she remembered. He was a Black male, too tall to be considered cute by many strangers. Instead, he looked like the national boogeyman since the birth of a nation and before. Kai was wearing a dress shirt and tie, but still. Charlotte glanced at the gas station behind them. Someone had made a junkyard of the station's sidewall, not as visible from the street. Rusted old cars, discarded gas cans, an old road sign advertising Fatima cigarettes, which she'd never heard of. Maybe this was what Kai had meant too. These items were pissed off because they were old and forgotten, like she had so often forgotten grandmama. Music was playing faintly from the house. Elvis? It was impossible to mistake the voice, but the music was gospel, not rock and roll. She recognized the song, Peace in the Valley, from the handful of times she'd attended church with grandmama at Christmas. Charlotte did not go to the little house's sagging front porch right away as she'd planned. She stared, thinking it over. The plants on the porch, even in the hanging basket, were dead. Only a screen door was closed across the doorway, but despite the light she thought she'd seen from the road, the house was dark now. It was hard to imagine that light had ever shined from this house, much less a moment before. A hidden hinge squealed lazily back and forth. At the edge of the wooden awning, she saw the chain from a ruined porch swing rocking in the mild breeze. Somewhere behind the house, a dog was barking. It might not be big, but it wasn't small. Maybe it was on a chain, maybe it wasn't. Then Charlotte noticed the Confederate flag on the bumper sticker on the oversized truck parked near the porch. The words printed beside it had faded, but the crossed blue stripes and white stars still showed. Charlotte's heart thumped her breastbone. She'd known a girl at UCLA who defended the flag as heritage and insisted it wasn't racist despite the way racists loved it. But now Kai's words came back. Everything is pissed off. How hadn't she noticed it right away? None of it felt right. Instead of stepping toward the house, Charlotte stepped away. She looked back at Kai, and he was watching her wide-eyed, his nose pressed to the window on the driver's side. She gestured toward the house dismissively. Never mind. And he nodded, agreeing wholeheartedly. He motioned for her to come back. Charlotte walked back toward her car, but then she remembered the crunching sound where she'd parked it. It would drive her crazy to wonder if she'd damaged a tire, so she leaned over to take a peek. Her left front tire had knocked over a mound of large, sharp-edged stones alongside a silver cross, tarnished black. Damn. She kicked the closest tire for firmness to make sure it wasn't punctured. Then she knelt to see if the stones had left any marks on the bumper the rental guy in Tallahassee would notice. The car was fine, but broken glass was scattered across the soil from a cracked picture frame near the cross. She picked up the frame and saw a decades-old photo she could barely make out, the image splotched by rain and time. Vaguely, she could make out a white man's long, gray beard. Desecration! A woman's voice screeched from somewhere, from everywhere. Charlotte dropped the photo frame, gasping. She was so startled she had to hold the car's warm hood for balance, her neck yanking around too hard to see who had spoken. A woman was standing behind the house's screen door, features hidden by the mesh. All Charlotte could make out was a powder blue house dress, maybe a floral pattern. Her face was in shadow. Desecration! Had she damaged a memorial site or even a grave? The word charged Charlotte's thoughts so violent that it felt imposed. Desecration! The insects buzzing seemed to flurry between her ears rather than beyond them. Kai was thumping on his window. Let's go, she heard him call, muffled through the thick buzzing. And I'm gonna stop there.
You gonna stop there?
Yeah.
What happens next?
They leave.
See there? See how you are?
They leave. That's what happens there.
So do you get the initial creative impulse, the discomfort that existed in the real world, in a real event, that she then turned into an incident using the craft to generate and communicate that emotion? What
that flagpole represented to me is what that story became.
There you go. There you go.
Now you go, boy.
Okay, so mine relates to having traveled and seen lots of ads about, formerly colonialized places, islands, Hawaii and whatnot, where the natives just seem so happy to see, the colonizers and to serve them as menials, and we believe that these people just love us, and I thought to myself, what are they really thinking? And out of that came my story called Come Home to Atropos. Editorial note to Carver Koufax. I understand that monies have been exchanged and that the Atropos account has been good for us in the past. However, I'm not entirely certain that we want to continue working with this project beyond this point. There are certain legalities. Yes, this infomercial can be placed upon the internet through offshore servers, and moral questions that have to enter the equation. I'm not entirely certain that our finance department has considered the implications, although I do acknowledge and respect the time and energy already invested. We agreed to the contract, and I suppose we must continue, but I wish to formally register my discomfort with the situation. I am also puzzled about the stipulation that the infomercial be promoted to primarily white upper-class markets. Isn't this racist? Adrian Stein, President, Stein & Baker Advertising. The following is rough script submitted for your approval. The art department can be trusted to add their own input and illustrations as we continue the process of development. Musical accompaniment is not my forte, but perhaps some of the more celebratory local tunes by their native group Los Muertos. Carver Koufax, Creative Operations, Stein & Baker Advertising. Infomercial script, Project Atropos. Image, crashing Caribbean waves beneath a summer moon. Special effects to enhance silvery reflections on the romantic waves. Narrator's voice should have that "this is a colonnet" quality. Is that guy still alive? Narrator. Come home to Atropos, my friend. Here in the Caribbean, you will experience a paradise of golden beaches and sunny days, enough to fill your senses and melt away your cares and woes. Image. Friendly brown-skinned natives. And should we change days above? Technically, the average stay is less than 24 hours after all. Narrator. We understand your very special situation, and our smiling, happy guides will welcome you from the moment that you step off the plane. Image. Say to Tropos Airport, please use effects to wipe away the hurricane damage. Make it look good. Can we get B-roll of arrivals? And for God's sake, clean them up. Drooling and wheelchair bound just isn't sexy. Narrator. Surround you with love and support as you approach your final experience. While others may have mocked and discouraged you, telling you haven't the right to do what you wish with your bodies, we understand that all journeys come to an end, and that choosing the moment for that is one of the greatest rights a human being can enjoy. We are a people who remember a time when our bodies did not belong to us, when we were told that there would be divine judgment for the ending of pain and sorrow. Understanding is the birth of compassion. The history of Atropos has made us accepting of a wide variety of choices. We learned to take sadness in stride, to find the freedom within what others might consider oppression. And we know that despite whatever diagnosis you may have received, there is still joy for you to be found in our smiling faces and cheerful eyes. Note, here our employers wish us to insert a specific clip of natives dancing in the street around 3 elderly wheelchair-bound youth-tourists. I have to admit that the dancers seemed more than just welcoming and supportive. There was something gleeful? Yes, that might be the right word. They seemed too happy. Isn't this a little inappropriate? Can we not find some alternative images? CK. Narrator. Here you will find the shepherds you have sought to lead you to your destiny. From the moment you step off the plane or cruise ship near the docks, as so many of our ancestors did prior to reaching their final destinations, working in the Americas. Note to Image Library. Is Gone with the Wind in public domain now? There's some great possibilities there. Can we license? Narrator. Or enjoying any number of wonderful opportunities in Central America, whether enjoying the sunshine, raising cotton and textiles in the Carolinas, or treasure hunting for gold and diamond deposits in the mountains of Brazil's Minas Gerais. These migrant workers left their homes centuries ago with hope in their hearts and were rewarded beyond their imaginings. We invite you to celebrate their first view of the new world from the same perspective. Note to Image Library. We need shots of the transport ships arriving, happy workers disembarking, eager for adventure. It shouldn't look exactly like a vacation, but let's stretch the analogy as far as it can go, shall we? And for the Brazilian mines, can we find pictures of Black kids digging in sand at the beach? Let's keep it light while respecting historicity, of course. Narrator. Our people happily perform dances and rituals celebrating these arrivals and departures, playing their roles with practiced ease, and the weight of their papier-mâché chains is lightened by the twinkle in their eye, knowing that as all such delightful play, the slave is actually the master, forcing their supposed captors to provide all food and shelter and entertainment, allowing them to enjoy life as few ever have or will again. But we hope to give you a tiny taste of their joy. Image Library. Use your judgment. We need a variety of images of the beautiful people of Atropos and the hospitality they can provide. Certainly we can find some who don't look hungry, and no amputees, please. Narrator. Surrounded by love and comfort, in air-conditioned buses, you will tour our beautiful island. You will, of course, see the extensive hurricane damage you have heard of. Do not be alarmed by the lack of water and power to these regions. Our people are resourceful, and although your leaders felt it would be best for us to rely upon our own resources, our people feel only welcoming towards you and will cheer you on your way. And considering that obesity is a plague of the modern world, you will be delighted to see so little of it here. In fact, The World Health Organization recently declared the Ethiopians to be among the least obese people on Earth. You will see closed factories due to America's embargoes and power outages, but as your great philosopher Napoleon Hill once said, in every disaster is the seed of an equivalent benefit. Think and grow rich. Had we but known that that was all it took. We are a resourceful people who can be trusted to find other means of generating income. You are living proof of that yourself. You will have the opportunity to visit the many locations where our ancestors learned to work in the sun through long hours and with modest caloric intake. Not for nothing are we called the spa of the Caribbean. Our fortunate fare bearers found plenty of opportunities to learn the new chattel system, the one where our work could be transformed into good, hard American money. What luck that we, who had not developed such systems, were able to take advantage of pre-existing structures. What a blessing to simply slip into them, receive our new names, languages, and religions, say goodbye to the cares and woes of personal responsibility. How can we possibly show our gratitude to the descendants of these wise ones? The depth of that gratitude cannot be expressed in mere words. At the end of your wonderful day, you'll be taken to your hotel, where you will have an opportunity to meet more kindred souls on a similar journey. Those still ambulatory enough to enjoy dancing may do so, while others can listen to our local musical troupe, Los Muertos, until dawn, or be wheeled out to watch the sunrise while savoring specialized tropical drinks with our well-known coconut pineapple phenobarb infusions, a new spin on an old favorite. Holothane inhalation and ketamine injections are also available on request, as well as trademark tetrodotoxin specialties hand harvested from the zombie cucumber sea urchins for which our island neighbors are so famous. By special request, we can also provide acepromazine, propofol, or methamphetamine, its combinations guaranteed to usher you gently to your eternal reward. While our trademark concoctions can protect your taste buds against any bitterness inherent in the medications offering the relief you crave, we respect that some are conflicted and wish the bite of Socrates' hemlock, an old favorite given a modern twist, served in a coconut shell with a tiny festive umbrella. For those even more convinced that voluntary sin is an exit, concoctions infused with potassium chloride may help purge your soul with intensity even a martyr could envy. We promise a truly stimulating passage. Custom designed exits are also available, and our expert staff is eager to consult with you on any refinements you may desire. A variety of ministers, priests, and even a rabbi are on call for your prayer needs. We accept all major credit cards, but require co-signers for other deferred payment plans, of course. Watching one final sunrise, you'll be able to close your eyes, knowing that you have ended your pain and suffering in the hands of those who have much reason to wish to assist you. Isn't it time?
So that's a nasty little piece of work.
I actually had that story in my mind for almost 30 years.
Colonization comes home.
Colonization comes home.
So this island nation is offering a beautiful retreat for any wealthy Westerners who want to come die there.
Assisted suicide as a national
tourism.
As national tourism.
Hey,
yes.
Listen, that could be real.
Yeah, exactly.
That could be real.
So the horror in that is implicit in a couple of different ways. First of all, there's that concept of suicide itself. If you were to take the race out of it and it was an alien species, you could have done the same thing. But also the implied horror of these people who have been everything has been taken from them to the point where they're supposed to rejoice in being able to change your sheets or clean your toilets. Mm-hmm. You know, it enabled me to expel not fear particularly, but the anger over the fear. You know, anger is a mask over fear in that sense. You look at what somebody is angry about, look under that, and you'll find something they're afraid of. So if you address that fear, you're tapping into something that is deep and powerful.
So Steve and I, in addition to teaching Black Horror course online and an Afrofuturism course online, we also teach writing. And even, since I am assuming some of you here are writers, we wanted to take some of our time before we go to the Q&A, let me get to the right slide, to talk about a little bit of the process of writing these stories. Oh, that's a danger word. We forgot to talk about that. But here, the writing process, something that we call life writing. And Steve, why don't you talk about that?
Okay, so life writing is the application of Campbell's model of the hero's journey to the process of writing or to the process of life. Specifically, how that would apply to getting into the field of writing, assuming that what you're interested in is books and published writing, although this can be easily applied to screenwriting, or anything else that you're trying to do with a little creativity. The first thing, write a sentence a day. No matter what the day is, all the excuses you have about not getting your work done, reduce the amount of stuff that you have to get done down to it being short enough that there is no logical excuse anymore. And then you're dealing with the emotions that stop you. And then you can use therapy or meditation or biofeedback or philosophy or journaling or whatever you're doing to help you deal with the discomfort. But in terms of writing, if you write one sentence a day, you're going to get it done. You can actually, this process can actually be said, write a book a year with a sentence a day, because it will work out that way.
There are many days I have not felt like writing or didn't have time, and I could just do that sentence and keep those embers stirred up so that the fire doesn't go out.
And the truth is, that if you do all the things you need to do to organize, to be able to sit down at your computer, turn your computer on, get your head in the right place, get your coffee, do this, do that, and write one sentence, you'll often find that you'll write a paragraph. And if by the time you write a paragraph, you'll often find you can write a page.
Yeah.
So it's overcoming that initial inertia. The second thing is to write 1 to 4 short stories a month. I don't care what your intentions are. If you want to write a book, that's great. But writing a book is like running a marathon. Okay, you don't run a marathon if you've never run around the block. Writing short stories, you can write a short story in a single sit down, and all of the basics of writing a novel are contained in embryonic form in a short story. So that short story is the smallest complete unit of writing.
Beginning, middle, and end.
Beginning, middle, and end. That's right. It enables you to work on your skills, to work on your thematics, to work on your characterization, your dialogue, your description, whatever else it is.
How do you introduce a character quickly that your readers will empathize with?
That's right.
For only 20 or 25 pages.
Also, if you're trying to write a book, people spend 5 years trying to write a book.
7. I just spent 7 writing my last
And
book.
if that book gets rejected, it can be devastating to your ego. But on the other hand, if you're writing a story every week or a story every month, by the time you get the rejection slip, you'll be several stories down the road. It's the process that's important, not the individual products. Remember that. It's the process. Get your process right. Live your life in a way that, it's like, I'm just going to live this day right. I'm going to take care of my family. I'm going to work out. I'm going to work. Okay. If I do that, I look at that 6 months from now, a year from now, what will be true about my life if I live a succession of days like this? I will have written a bunch of stories, and my family will be healthier, and I'll be in better shape, and whatever else, whatever it is. But the excuse, what this is designed to do is to find out where writer's block hits you. Writer's block is nothing more than an interruption in the process that enables you to write, get better at what you're writing, publish, and continue to get better at publishing. So it's anything that interrupts that flow is writer's block. So you want to test that as often as possible. Every day, every week, every month, you're testing yourself to see, how am I doing? Not just my mind, but my heart. Am I doing the physical things I need to do, the writing? Am I handling my emotions? Where's my fear going? Is it stopping me or is it driving me? And do I understand my process? Okay, the third step is to polish and submit your work. You have to finish your work and you have to get it off to the publishers. At least one story every month. If you will do that, you're on that road that will get you there.
Even better if you have a writer's group that can look at that story before you send it out. Make sure it's ready. Make sure it's ready to go. Try to have skilled eyes, not just your mom who loves everything you write, but skilled eyes on your writing. That's probably the quickest way to grow as a writer, is to have at least one set of skilled eyes to give you feedback before you send it out. You
can spend 5 years working on a story. I don't care, as long as you're finishing and submitting at least one story every month. It's that thing. I don't care if it's a short story. It's a flash fiction, half a page. Some of your work is going to be longer than others, but just tell your mind that you want it to write at least one short story a month, and do that. You are working on yourself. The fourth step, don't rewrite except to editorial request. Do not get caught in a loop of endlessly rewriting your work. You'll never get perfect. The part of you that can evaluate the quality of your work is always going to be better than the part of you that creates it. The part of you that creates it is like a little kid. That's that little kid inside you that just wanted to dance in the living room.
It's your inner child.
Yes, it's your inner child. It's the adult part of yourself that went to college. It's the adult part of yourself that has read the work of the masters. If you judge your first draft by what Shakespeare did, I mean, for God's sake, you realize how you're crippling yourself?
Or Toni Morrison.
Or Toni Morrison, that's right. So once you polish and submit it, don't go back and keep rewriting it unless an editor says, you know something, if you change this or this, I'd be interested in this story. That is what you're looking for.
And then read 10 times what you write. You
Yes.
know, the books that you read are your first teacher, even if you've never taken a writing class, although obviously taking a writing class is great. And then repeat. You know, don't get stuck in any of these steps because you're not being true to your dream to be a writer.
So repeat 100 times. So far, up until this time, not one of my students who has done this has gotten further than story 27 before they started publishing. Not one of them. Once I put this together, in a much simpler form for my own career, and I got to story number 23. So this is designed for people who are serious, who really want it, because if you do this, you will get published, and you do have a path to getting better and better and better. And you will find out all the demons that have been stopping you from the past.
Let me go to the next
Yes.
slide. Social justice warrior.
Yes, I am. You know, the fact that people have demonized the term social justice warrior, I just have two words: screw them.
Exactly.
This is exactly what I am.
This is what our art is all about.
Yes, I'm exactly a social justice warrior, and I'm proud to stand up and say that. And the question is, how do we take care of ourselves in the midst of all this? So this could be for social justice writers. We could do this, but it's that thing. We need people who care about the world and are willing to stand up and be counted and to resist oppression, who cannot be intimidated, who know that they have to die, so they might as well die for something. In fact, you want to get in my face, we can do this right now. So the first step is love yourself. Start with self-care. Love yourself. Be happy. The Dalai Lama said the meaning of life is to seek joy. So start by connecting with your own heart, loving that little child inside you who started this journey of life, and do something every day to delight yourself. Remember that. This is so critical. What's number 2?
And if you find yourself in a place where you are so either traumatized from your childhood or past experiences that you're kind of an island, you don't have love that you're sharing with another person, try to figure out why that is. Find at least one other person to love, because we are not meant to go on this journey alone. Human beings are herd animals, so we're not meant to be on this journey alone.
And loving another person will force you out of your own bull. It will force you to tell the truth. It will force you to see your humanity in another person. This is critical to the process of maturation. Loving is one of the primary human experiences. However you find that love with another adult human being who you're planning to share your life with. If you can do that, and you know, those who do not choose to be in paired relationships, I don't understand that world, but I know that love is the most precious thing in the world. So love as you can.
Yeah.
A dear friend.
Love your friends.
Love your friend, a niece, a nephew. Take responsibility. Find relationships that you're not willing to walk away from, and then fight to have your heart expand until it can contain both of you. The number 3 is understand history without guilt, blame, or shame. Whether that is the social context, you know, how did racism happen? Why is this going on? What is the human explanation for why the world is what it is? And to understand that people are doing the best they can. That most of the violence we see in the world comes from anger, and most of the anger comes from fear. That if you can understand that, and if you can be beyond that, you can be one of the ones who creates a path for others. But this is also going to be true in terms of gender issues. If you're a guy and you need to demonize women, or you're a woman and you need to demonize men, you're not playing the game. You're not in the game. You're not one of the ones who's going to be able to help us resolve this, heal this. So understanding history without guilt, blame, or shame also means forgiving yourself for your transgressions, for your failings, for your flaws. If you can forgive yourself, And then you can see yourself in one other person. You develop the ability to see yourself in humanity.
I think we've all learned in recent years that you can spend all day trying to engage with trolls on social media. I don't do it. You kind of do it sometimes.
I do it sometimes. I don't engage with trolls for their sake. I will engage with trolls to try to understand what's going on with them. How do they come to these conclusions? Why do they vote in this way? And out of doing that, for instance, I evolved a simple question that I've been able to use to detect when I'm talking to a racist. And that question is this, quote unquote, given the same historical circumstances, would white people have suffered as much from slavery and taken as long to heal? A racist cannot answer that question easily because they know it exposes them.
Because they believe white people are superior.
That's right. They believe white people.
They think white people probably wouldn't have even been slaves, but
yeah, but if they were slaves, we would have gotten through it easily. They would have
bounced back,
and we wouldn't. But allies are going to be found from the group of people who say, yeah, people are just people. White people would have been just as damaged.
So in my social media, I see my audience as artists, especially Black artists, Black creators, Black politics, social justice politics, and our allies. I'm talking to all y'all. If you're an ally, we are all in the same tent. But if you reveal to yourself not to be an ally, block is free.
Exactly.
And win with integrity. Is that fairly self-explanatory?
No, I don't think it is. I think that I want to say about winning with integrity. Remember that you've been wrong in the past, then we'll be wrong again in the future. And you've needed grace. You've needed forgiveness. When you win, never lose sight of the fact that the person that you won over is another human being, another brother or sister. I'm not saying that you don't do what needs to be done, but there's no need to dishonor them. There's no need to shame them. I mean, in the martial arts, the core attitude of the martial arts is I'm prepared to die and I'm ready to take you with me. You might have to do something that is devastating, but there is this thing called the three gates that exists in Sufi teachings and elsewhere. And there's three questions that you ask yourself before any word or behavior. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it useful? I may have to kill you, but I don't have to be unkind. I don't have to be insulting. I don't have to torture you. I don't have to shame you. I just have to, unfortunately, remove you. So
he means in a self-defense situation.
Do win, because you have to show that it is possible. You have to show the world that it is possible to win and still be loving. If you can do that, you will attract followers, because there are people wondering, how can I be a decent human being and still get the things that I need out of life? If you can be one of the ones that shows how it's possible to do that in integrity with your spiritual beliefs, and still love your family, if you can succeed and still be healthy and loving, you're going to be magnetic. And that's what the world needs, is winners who are also leaders, who are also good and decent human beings.
So I promised you a prompt, or threatened you with a prompt, depending on how you see it. And we're not going to be able to have you fulfill this right now and share it with us, but I hope you will as you go home. Before we head into Q&A, we'll have a chance to just talk it through, and maybe it'll give you an idea for one of your short stories that you'll write this month. Write down a trauma, phobia, or recurring nightmare you could address in a work of fiction. I'll use Last Stop on Route 9 as an example. Trauma is maybe a strong word for what happened when we were lost on that road, but coming across this compound with that flag flying so proudly high, and I do mean there were like 3-4 houses. I was like, is that like a militia? I didn't know what was going on there. Not only is a moment of discomfort on the day of my mother's funeral, when I'm lost on a road, near where she grew up, but it brings back the memories of all the racial trauma she suffered. The reason I think her life was cut short because of stress and racial stress. See, I can make the tears come just thinking about it. It's not about seeing the Confederate flag. It's about what that flag represented, and it felt like a trauma to me. So what story premise would best help you resolve this trauma, either directly or through allegory? So I just said, okay, let's go back to being lost on that road. Instead of me, it's going to be a younger version of me with a child in the car. And instead of just a single Confederate flag, it's more like just an angry setting. weird noises, dogs barking. If you read the story further, dogs are going to show up out of nowhere, chasing them in the car. This is all historical racial trauma. I'm afraid of dogs in the now because I had a bad experience with one when I was 18 months old, but I also remember how dogs were used to track us down. I remember how dogs mangled us, okay? So I decided to create sort of an allegory. You know, it's a place through a fog bank that's kind of lost in time. It's not really quite our world. It's hanging on to hate. This is what hate looks and feels like if you just touch it accidentally, if you don't get the hell out. And what protagonist would be the best person to carry the reader viewer through the story? For whom would this be the best or worst thing that ever happened to them, or both? Those are just questions you can ask yourself, because there's a difference between a premise and a story. A premise is, what if you got lost on your way from a funeral and you ended up through a fog bank in the land of hate, which is kind of what this is. But that's not a story. In order to have a story, you need a protagonist. The protagonist's actions are what will create the story. The protagonist in reaction, or the protagonist carrying out actions on her own, are what create the story. So I decided that a young woman about your age, you know, I think she's only 22. She's not much older than many of you, if you're students, who feels disconnected from her history and her past. She didn't know her grandmother that well. You didn't hear that in the story, but she's carrying guilt about the fact that she did not know her grandmother that well. She did not know her grandmother's stories. She did not know her grandmother's history, and now it's too late. Now she's just left with all the raw hate that's left behind without ever having had that really strong connection with history and her grandmother to give her the strength to deal with the hate, right? So whereas the boy in the car, he may have been over prepared by his father's stories from that town. He probably heard a little bit too much too soon, so that he's very wary, very fearful. He's not going to be stopping nowhere to ask for directions in this town, because his father has already told him what he went through growing up in this town. And between the two of them, I kind of have a co-protagonist in that story, a young boy who has some sense and a young woman who doesn't know the stories, who doesn't have the wisdom that even this child has, is confronting this hate without having had that relationship of nurturance and love from that grandmother to help prepare her. So that's who I decided the best character would be. So that's all you need. Those are the ingredients for a story. Find a nightmare, a phobia, for Jordan Peele with Get Out, as we've discussed.
Yeah, in that, it would be the tribal sense of who can I trust?
He's alone.
Even his liberal allies, I would have voted for Obama 3 times.
Yeah.
End up just, seeing his black body as something not entirely human, just a tool to be used. And so I think that it is reasonable that Jordan had that sense that that's the world that he was watching. Who can I trust? Who actually cares about me? Are there any real friends out there? Take that core stuff, go deep with it.
Another example, for those of you who saw Us, he discussed this in an interview. What prompted that story, like in its seedling sort of stage, was back when he was on Mad TV and he used to ride the subway. He had sort of an image or an idea of himself in an empty subway station staring across the tracks at someone who looked just like him. What would that mean? What would that imply? I have a feeling it also might have had something to do with his changing economic status as a young TV star, starting to get that TV money when he came from sort of a house of struggle.
You will often hear wealthy people talking about, if they created their wealth, about how they lost friends as they went.
Yeah.
Basically, they would be willing to pay for their friends to travel with them, but the friends didn't want to do that and started literally accusing them. You've changed.
So
you've changed.
As you can see, it doesn't have to be related to race at all. All of our experiences are valid. All of our traumas, our phobias, or nightmares. I used to have a nightmare about my tooth being loose all the time. Write a story about that.
Yeah,
what does it mean?
It might be gender issues, or it could be queer issues. It could be trans issues. It could be, issues that have to do with disease or people who are differently abled.
Like wherever you go, you're invisible because people won't see you.
Whatever your fear is, experiment with it in short form and read. If you're reading 10 stories, for every story that you write, you'll start seeing how to do this. You'll start, asking yourself, well, what was What was the original creative impulse behind the story? What is the skill that they used to do it? How did they address these different things? And, frankly, just to be totally honest with you, the information that we've given you, the basic structural information, we could take any one statement in the 10 basic steps probably that we told you and break that down for an entire year of teaching. But you've got what it is that you need if you're willing to do the work.
And also, like we said, read 10 times what you write. So especially with short stories, because a lot of young writers try to jump right into novels because that's what they read. Makes perfect sense. If you love,
and that's where the money is.
N.K. Jemisin, Octavia Butler, Nalo Hopkinson, or whoever your favorite, Tomi Adeyemi, whoever your favorite writers are, you want to write that. But really, like Steve said, you don't start running the marathon if you're just starting out. You start with those short stories. Not that they're easy. They're not easy.
They're tough.
They are tough, but they're less tough if you read a lot of short stories. Short
stories are where you're going to school. Novels are where you get paid. Okay. So it's until you've written a novel's worth of short stories, I would not. The real problem is the people who try something once or twice, they don't succeed. So they figure they didn't have the talent to make it. And the truth is, I don't believe in talent. I've never seen the concept of talent do anybody any good. All I've seen it do is people not trying something because they feel like they didn't have enough talent. What I have seen with every single successful person I've seen in all the arenas in which I have any level of mastery or excellence is hard work over time. And then getting up and trying it again and again and again until bad luck gets tired of dealing with you and goes on to the next person in line.
There were writers when I was an undergraduate at Northwestern, they had workshops, much like you see in graduate programs, creative writing workshops. So that was a great opportunity. And I met writers at my age who were way better, more polished writers. One had been published even before he went to college. So he was like a prodigy in my mind. And I just have to tell you, those names that I kept tracking year after year to see, when is their book going to come out? When is it going to come out? They haven't come out. Okay. So even those people I thought were more talented than I was, let life stop them from writing.
I remember there was a guy when I was in college, and the teacher would just drool over this guy. And his writing was great. I mean, in some ways, on a sentence for sentence basis, and he would write these stories about this young man who would build a motorcycle by hand from pieces that he got with all of this pride and this existential sense of connection. And then he'd ride the motorcycle up to top of a hill and look down on his town. And it was just so beautifully written. Whereas I would write stories about the giant amoeba that attacked that town.
Yeah.
And the teacher and the students laughed at me, and he laughed at me. And I noticed something, that he was the belle of the ball. But if anybody said anything about his story he didn't like, he fell apart. And I said, that's interesting. He doesn't have what it takes to succeed.
You have to be able
to take
cannot
take criticism.
You have to be able to take guidance, criticism. Now in Hollywood, especially, half the battle is
I knew at that
taking
moment,
the notes.
I knew at that moment that I was going to succeed and he would not. And it didn't matter what the rest of the people in that class thought. It didn't matter what the teacher thought. It didn't matter what he thought. I knew that I had what it took if I had the courage to keep getting up, no matter how many times they knocked me down.
So we have time for some questions. I know we've been doing a lot of talking and a lot of teaching and reminiscing. Are there any, now I see one in chat about my short story, Last Stop on Route 9. It is available free online through Nightmare Magazine. So if you put in the title, just Route 9 and Tanana Reeve, it should pop up. And there's also, by the way, a great enhanced audio version with sound effects that a podcast called Nightlight Pod did that is very scary. So that might be a more fun way to read it.
Yeah. So any questions from any members of our audience, and we will do our best.
There is a question in the question and answer that says, but is the Comet about humanity misogynoir? How come Black women, especially darker ones, are often ignored in these stories? I don't know if you want to tackle that.
Well,
sounds like a compound question.
Speaking to Du Bois, I think because he was an anti-lynching advocate, And for the most part, very often, these lynchings were sparked by rape accusations against Black men who allegedly had raped Black women, even going to white women rather, even going to Emmett Till, which, you know, based on a lie, she's still alive, he's been dead since 1955. This was a common lie used to steal Black people's property, a common lie when whites were jealous of Black business people. I know that my mother had a family story where one of her uncles had to like escape in the trunk of a car because whites were jealous that he had a resort for Black people. So jealousy, fear, all this was fueling all these rapes, especially around the time he wrote this story in 1920. So that's why I'm sure he chose a Black man and a white woman, because that was the most sort of controversial pairing that was leading to so many deaths. To your point, I know some people were disappointed about Black women not having bigger roles in, say, Get Out, to speak to like literally 100 years later. And I think Jordan Peele answered that with Us, where he made Adelaide the strong lead. Right. But I really do think in a lot of cases, it's going to be about Black women as the creators, as the directors, as the executives who greenlight those projects to see a change. And we are going to see it, but it absolutely does need to happen.
And, you know, colorism is a real thing.
Yeah,
absolutely. You know, that's an entire discussion we could have about why is it that an oppressed population begins to want to look like their oppressors.
Yeah.
You saw that in Japan after World War II, with Japanese women getting plastic surgery to change the shape of their eyes and plastic surgery to change the shape of their bodies.
Yeah.
You know, this is human beings do this, protective coloration. Let me look like the enemy so that the enemy will not hurt me. And unfortunately, it happened here in the United States regarding race. No question.
Here's another. What are some Black horror short stories or films that you recommend for us to start with?
Oh, wow. I should have my list ready. Speaking of Black women, there is a Black woman scholar named Dr. Kenitra Brooks, and Linda D. Addison, who is like one of the longest lived horror writers, Black horror writers in the country, co-edited a volume called Sycorax's Daughters. Sycorax's Daughters. I'll write it in chat, and it's all short stories by and poems by Black women.
And New Sons here by Nisi Shaw, Nisishawl. Nisi is an editor and a writer, a fine one, and she has been engaged in promoting voices of people of color for some time. So she has some excellent anthologies and excellent collections.
To take it old school, Dark Matter, I think it's a century of Black speculative fiction in the African diaspora, and Dark Matter, Reading the Bones are collections of horror and science fiction. And in terms of films, His House on Netflix, if you haven't seen it.
Really good.
Really, really good. It's African immigrant horror. Which again is taking the trauma of the immigration experience and racism once you reach a strange land and making it into a horror story, but with a twist that is like killer, and I'm not even gonna mention it.
And I don't want to brag, but we've already seen Candyman.
Yeah, the new Candyman, when it comes out, I think it will be out obviously this year, finally. I wish it had come out or could have come out last year, but
see it with an audience.
And the one thing I will say about it, for all, Universal actually hired us to come in and sort of give a talk on why the original Candyman was so racist. And if you haven't seen it, Tony Todd is great in it as Candyman, and thank goodness he brought that weight to the role. But it's basically like monstrous Black man pursues white woman. Familiar, like King
is
Kong.
Horribly punished eternally for daring to think that he could couple with her.
Right.
It's pretty vile stuff.
And honestly, it is one of my favorite horror movies because I still won't say Candyman 5 times looking in the mirror. So I get it.
Candyman?
Yeah. But the new Candyman, Nia DaCosta's Candyman, she's the director, and also I think she probably had a hand in the story too. So. Nia DaCosta's Candyman is the Candyman legend through a Black lens, and that's all I'm gonna say.
Well, I will say is that it wasn't a cash grab, that they had a very specific idea. There was a genuine creative impulse at the core of that movie. And watch the whole thing. After you've watched the whole thing, you'll get it.
There's a monster movie on Netflix called Sweetheart. A lot of people have slept on. J.D. Dillard, a young Black director, just happens to have a Black biracial lead. No real reason. A lot of fun creature work. And I would say also look online for short films, because in fact, the vast majority of Black horror creators have not been able to navigate the Hollywood system to get the multi-million dollars it takes. So we wrote a short film called Danger Word that is online.
Yes.
And there are many
Dangerword.com.
Yeah, dangerword.com.
And here, look, there's a guy who wrote a book called Dove Simons, wrote a book, did a course called the 3-Day Film School. And he says something very interesting. If you want to figure out how to get to a $100 million movie, there's actually a path to getting there. First, you make a $10 million movie, you make that successful. How do you do that? You make $1 million movie and you make that successful. How do you do that? You make a $100,000 movie, make that. How do you do that? You do a $10,000 movie. How do you do that? You do a $1,000 movie. Now, of all of these things, the $1,000 movie or the $100 movie, which could be done simply by writing a 1-act play, getting actors from your local film school do it and recording it on your iPhone and then posting that on YouTube.
I made a movie I posted on YouTube that I shot, and I'm not an actress, but I starred in it because I didn't have time to find a cast. It's called Lost. So if you look up my name in Lost, it's like 9 minutes long, if that. It cost me maybe $50 worth of Halloween like decorations to try to make them look scary. But in addition to finding films to support, I strongly encourage you students to make your own. But again, to get a sense of how to make a short film, you have to watch short films. Like, how do you deal with the budget limitations? How do you tell a story in 10 minutes? You'd be surprised. One of my favorite short horror films, which isn't Black, but it was 6 minutes long, and they made it into a feature because it was so successful.
Yeah, you can't, if you make a movie for $100 or maybe $500, over $500, I would not suggest that you spend more than $500 of your own money making a movie. That you make that small movie and then you use that to convince other people to contribute to make your movie. Because if you cannot convince people to donate money to make your movie, how are you going to attract an audience? How are you going to attract studio people? So you're actually learning the business as you go. You can start by hiring your friends over and $50 worth of donuts and pizza, and is all you're paying them. But then when you post it on YouTube, you then go to the local barbers or dentists or whatever people in your neighborhood who have some money and say, listen, this is what I'm doing. I want to make this movie. We will put your name on the movie. Would you like to contribute to my movie? That's the business of it. Indeed. And so by working your way up from $100 movie to $1,000 movie to a $10,000 movie, and at every stage you are learning. At every stage you're learning so many different things. You can literally walk your way up to doing the big movie.
We did a horror short in 2013 called Danger Word. We were basically beating the Black horror drum. We used that as a part of our fundraising to talk about the fact there is a subgenre. It's Black horror. This is what it is. And we were able to hire a name actor, Frankie Faison, who has been in every Hannibal Lecter movie.
That's right.
And he was Pops in Luke Cage. That's probably where you recognize him from. And a newcomer, well, not really. She'd been 4 years on One Life to Live, and she could cry on cue. Saoirse Scott was the co-star. And the trauma, at least for me personally, was that I had just lost my mother. And we were living in Atlanta. We had kind of uprooted our whole lives, moved to Atlanta for 3 years. And this movie was kind of what that felt like the world is turned upside down. You're losing the one person or one of the people who's been in your life forever.
And we crowdfunded it on Facebook and social media, and we raised the money there.
$30,000.
$30,000. Now that means we were leveraging social connections that we've been building up for years. But if you don't have that, then like I said, you write a 1-act play that can be done on one set and filmed for $100. Put it up on YouTube. See if you attract anybody.
Yeah, you won't need $30,000. We had a professional cinematographer, professional sound people, professional makeup artists. They all got paid like what you usually get paid.
It was about $15,000 up front, $20,000, and the rest of it was for post-production and marketing.
But I know I have students at UCLA who've never made short films, who do short films for credit in my Black horror class. And if they can do it, you can do it.
And remember, I was not joking. Where's our image?
Here we go.
Yeah. the camera on your iPhone is more powerful than professional cameras were 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So, you know, you have the technology. There's no excuse other than saying, well, I'm not creative enough and I don't care to do the work. If that's okay, just buy the tickets then. But if you want to get into the game, this is the path for getting into the game.
Okay. Yeah. Did
So
you want to?
here's a couple more. Here's one. Could you read the movie Django as horror? What about the book Beloved?
Django Unchained is an action adventure revenge fantasy. It's not, you know, it is.
Some of the imagery is horrific.
Yes.
But the way I would distinguish it is that it's not primarily meant to inspire dread.
That's right. It's primarily designed to give a sense of heroism, a sense of that we can overcome these things. There was a hero who was powerful enough to overcome those things. So you need to have the horror, you need to have the negative things for his triumph to be large. But the dominant emotion, as you know, the arc was from, and it might have the largest character arc I've ever seen, from miserable slave to superhero. In essence, that's an amazing story arc. And the last images, you know, he's making his horse prance for his wife, and you know, it's a happy feeling.
So Beloved is an interesting case. The late Toni Morrison did not consider her novel Beloved to be horror, which I understand, because what would she be comparing it to, you know, in terms of what we see as horror. But here's the thing about horror. Horror lies in the eye of the beholder. So for me, in reading Beloved, it did feel like horror to me. And then when Jonathan Demme adapted it to screen, when some of the violence on the page was put on the screen, and I'm not even going to describe some of the scenes because they're so violent, then it does absolutely feel like horror. And from what I understand, they released it in October. And I think the director kind of played up some of the supernatural manifestation in the house, table sliding across the floor, and you know, those scenes at the very beginning to make it feel more like a traditional horror movie. So I think the film Beloved feels more like horror, but a lot of people will read the book and think it's horror too. Absolutely. So there's a ghost in it. There's a ghost. Come on.
So the question, in the past, there were storytellers who would gather in communities telling horror stories with audiences of children. What role does this oral tradition play in the horror storytelling tradition? Well, direct, because you know, storytelling was oral before it was writing, before it was written. You know, the oral storytelling is much older than the written word.
What else do you have for us?
How do you guys feel about the presence of Black people in the Dr. Sleep movie adaptation? They mentioned the Shining Black character.
Oh, okay. I'm glad. I almost brought up Dr. Sleep. I'm glad you brought it up. I think first of all, I loved the fact that they changed the race of the little girl Abra to being a little Black girl. I did not like that they killed off her Black father, which did not happen in the book.
Yeah,
okay? I mean, I did not like that.
One of my great peeves is the only Black man or the only Black person in the movie is killed, or they are desexed. Personal survival and genetic survival are right next to each other on Maslow's hierarchy. If you can stop a group of people from reproducing, or you can kill them, basically they disappear and you get to take their land and everything else they've got. So images like that clearly do not offend the people who make them.
No, I think there's like some comfort in it, unfortunately, for too many people. But having said that, if they had taken that out, if her father had not died, especially since he didn't die in the novel, it's like obviously going out of your way to kill the father. I would have thought it was fantastic because it not only highlighted this very talented young actress in the role as a very, you know, special Black girl, but it brought back that Scatman Crowther's character. I mean, not the actor because he's passed away, but his character, yes. Dick Halloran. While he is a spiritual guide and as a ghost appearing through the movie, he is a spiritual guide. But considering that in the original movie, he actually didn't live, and the second movie, Dr. Sleep, pretends that the first movie doesn't exist while stealing all of his imagery, it pretends that he never got killed, that he lived past that and he had a longer life.
Yeah, you can see people trying to work it out, trying to figure out, you know, what works, what doesn't work. And the only solution is going to be more people of color behind the camera.
That is absolutely.
That's the only thing that's going to make a difference, because you don't know whether you're talking to somebody who's oblivious or malevolent.
Exactly.
All right, let's see. Some people feel as if slavery films have been overdone and want happier movies. What are your thoughts?
And people were saying slavery movies were overdone when there were no slavery movies. In other words, prior to Django Unchained, arguably there had never been a major theatrical motion picture that dealt specifically with slavery from the position of the slave. It's arguable that that was the first that had ever been done by a major motion picture.
You got Roots, but that was TV.
That was TV.
And now we're too young to watch Roots.
You know, and Amistad had no slaves in it. It was the whole discussion of free Black people becoming, you know, what were they slaves or aren't they? Beloved was about ex-slaves. Glory was about ex-slaves. The thing itself is one of the third rails of American cinema and American culture. So Quentin Tarantino, being an absolute crazy man, did that. But by the time you got to the 12 Years a Slave, the only, as far as I can see, the second movie do that, people are already saying too much.
Yeah, so we had 12 Years a Slave, and we had Harriet, which is about escaping from slavery. Yeah. I can understand if people don't enjoy watching movies about slavery. But it's not true that we've had a lot of that.
That's right. So you have an institution that lasted centuries, and compare the number of movies about that, theatrical motion pictures about that institution, with the number of movies about the Civil War that only lasted 4 years. You know, you can't even count the number of movies that have been about the Civil War. So, how many movies have there been about the issue that made the Civil War inevitable? So the problem is not that we've had too many of these movies. The problem is that it hurts.
Yeah, and no one is more, as much as it might hurt us to watch movies about people who are enslaved, and it might not be our taste, no one wants to forget about slavery more than the white power structure, okay? No one would rather that none of us talk about it, none of us think about it, none of us watch it. So just bear that in mind, and also, yes, can we have some happy movies?
We have those happy movies.
And I'm not going to mention this filmmaker by name. Some of you know there was a love story that came out in recent years that could have been one of my favorite movies, but for the terribly violent downer ending and another scene I'm not going to get into.
Let's not get into that.
Y'all know what I'm talking about. And that kind of thing, I think, can sometimes be fixed if people just see the draft and like, well, how about we have a happy ending for this one? Yeah. Why does there have to always be a hail of bullets at the end of a movie about Black people? And actually, I would say the same thing about Da 5 Bloods. I don't mean to get critical, and I'm not criticizing Da 5 Bloods. It's a great film, great performances, but man, it was painful. Did so many people have to die?
Yeah. So it's not that all these, when people say, do all these movies have to be about this? It's never true that all of them are about this. What they're saying is, I am really sensitive to this. If you find a fly in your glass of punch, it's not that it's a glass of flies. It's that fly poisons the rest of the punch. You're not interested in the rest of the punch. We have that emotional reaction. I think that the right stories told about the things that have been painful to us are absolutely critical. That you can't simultaneously say racism is this terrible thing we've been dealing with for centuries, but we're just fine. No, look, either one or the other of those things is true. If it's this terrible thing we've dealt with for centuries, then we have been damaged by it. And it is perfectly legitimate to look at the way we're limping so that we can have some prescriptions about, well, what kind of therapy, emotional, mental, social, will correct this limp, will undo this damage. The only thing I want from white America is to stop pretending the damage didn't happen.
Yeah.
Do that. Just they've been in denial about it for so long that it's obvious to me that the truth will be a powerful thing.
Right. But yes, can we have more happy stories? Absolutely. My remedy for 2020 was a horror movie almost every day and some stand-up almost every day. And I love both my comedy and my horror.
Right. So let's look at Lena Waithe's Them. It has been criticized for being very similar to Us by Jordan Peele, and also for having a majority white production crew. All directors were white except for one Black woman. Thoughts about Them?
Well, first thing I know is that Lena Waithe is an executive producer, but the creator is a man named Little Marvin. And I know that, and I say that because I know there's a lot of Lena Waithe backlash in social media. So I think it's important that, I mean, she lent her name to it to help him get his project made, but it is not her project. She didn't write it. She didn't do nothing about it. He created it. I don't know the thing about the directors, That would be disappointing. I absolutely do believe that as more Black horror creators are getting their chance to tell their stories, I know when we're talking about series, we're constantly sending names of Black directors to the producers we're working with. So that would be an oversight. But I will push back a little bit on the idea that it's imitating Jordan Peele.
I don't see that at all.
Because Black horror creators have been telling white supremacy is the monster story since
and
Du Bois and earlier than that. So it's just now that Hollywood is more open to those stories. And I can guarantee you he was working on that movie long before Us came out.
And I think that their only similarity is Us, Them, is the title sounds familiar. Because Us, like I said, is not about race primarily, it's about class.
Right.
But Them is all about race. I mean, and then you got this Black family completely surrounded by, outnumbered and outgunned. It's horrible. Well, in that particular sense.
In that situation, is horrible. The pilot hasn't come out, so we've seen it, but other people haven't.
Right.
So we're not trying to spoil it, but you've seen from the ads that it's about a Black family that moves to a white neighborhood, and you're surrounded by enemies. And for me personally, that pushes all my buttons, because it reminds me of when I was a kid moving into all white neighborhoods. It reminds me that when we move from where we are now, we don't know what reception we're going to get in our next neighborhood. So. Yeah, but it won't be for everyone.
I would be careful about criticizing it in media.
And also, watch it first. Watch it first. It's not even out yet.
Just in terms of a more private discussion, I will say that I found myself asking myself, why am I watching this? What am I supposed to get from watching this?
I loved it. He didn't love it.
I didn't love it.
Yeah, I loved it because just grounded horror is my thing. There's something in the basement. I'm all for grounded horror, especially when it reminds me of personal experiences. But that won't be for everybody.
Thoughts on Antebellum with Janelle Monáe?
Haven't seen it.
Haven't seen it yet. I found myself very unmotivated to see it. There just was nothing about it that felt to me like I'm going to have a good time watching this, or I'm going to learn something I don't know, or whatever. And eventually I'll watch it.
I will eventually watch it. I'm not even going to comment because I just told people to see them before you criticize it. So I'm also going to have to see Antebellum before I criticize it.
Makes sense. What direction would you like to see Black horror take? Or another way to think about this is, where are some areas for Black horror to do better than it already has, whether in terms of narrative structure, content, theme, et cetera?
I want to just see more people trying small movies, which then have the opportunity to fail or succeed. Those that succeed, I want to see people who are able to back those successes in larger and larger movies, giving them more and more opportunities. So they are just simply covering the spectrum of what it is to be human, dealing with issues that are specific to Black people, dealing with issues that are universal, and then in combinations of those as the creators themselves have an inclination to do so. I want to see art. I want to see people telling the truth.
Yeah, selfishly speaking, as someone who's been publishing Black horror, I want to see more adaptation, not just of my work, but of other Black horror writers, because I think, and this is where my bias comes in, because I'm a prose writer and a screenwriter, but I do feel like screenwriters might be sort of leaning a little bit more into obviously what they think would succeed on a large scale in Hollywood, which is going to maybe leach out some of the nuance. It's not going to be a small story, things get like huge and big. Whereas in a prose story, racism might be the monster. Or there's a short story called The Bride Before You. What's by a writer named Stephanie? Oh, I can't think of her name, but it's just about a jealous sibling who looks like a spider who murders all of her brother's fiancés out of jealousy. It has nothing to do with race. It's sort of, I get like hints of Anansi because of the spider, but not even that. It's just a little horror story that happens to have Black people in it. So that's what I'm really looking forward to.
I'm looking forward to more African filmmakers coming in.
Don't worry.
That is something that's going to be terribly important, because white filmmakers are able to rest their work on 1,000 years of cultural history and mythology, in religion and so forth, and storytelling that go all the way back to their ancestors in the old country. Black Americans, that we had that connection severed from us. Very few of us can trace ourselves back to some particular group of people, but Africans don't have that problem.
And the other thing I really, really, really want to see is more opportunities for Black horror directors and writers, because Hollywood is built on relationships. If Black people have been shut out of those golf courses and relationships, then that's how we're going to end up with more films like Ma, where someone thinks it's a great idea to cast a Black actress in a project that wasn't written for a Black actress, and at the same time, not greenlight a script by a Black director that would have been a much more successful story from the standpoint of race.
Yeah, if you were going to do Ma, what you would have needed was a couple of other Black characters to balance her monstrosity. You know, give me that, and you know, have it happen in a more diverse community, and all of a sudden it's not about race anymore.
Maybe we learned a little bit more about her character before almost the end. Like, sorry if people haven't seen it, but she has a whole daughter that they didn't even introduce till the movie was almost over. It's like, that's not characterization. They didn't give her the care. Someone needed to look out for her.
So maybe one last question. If you define horror as inspiring dread, can you elaborate on how we can differentiate horror from other forms of speculative fiction when there is at times overlap?
Well, it's the dominant emotion.
Yeah.
In other words, horror does not say, it can be science fiction horror like Alien. It can be uncanny horror like The Color Out of Space. It can be spiritual horror like The Exorcist. It can be psychological horror like Psycho.
Yeah.
You know, so it's horror is about that dominant emotion.
Yeah, I don't think it really, unless you're writing a paper, and in which case, if you're writing a paper, then you make the arguments about why it's horror for you, because it is in the eye of the beholder. Get Out could be called a science fiction movie. That coagulate procedure where you put a white person in a Black person's body, that's science fiction. We call Get Out horror because it's scary. It's not just that it's science fiction. We're worried about Chris. We don't know what's going to happen in any given moment. Something doesn't feel right. The overwhelming emotion is dread, but it is also science fiction, and that's okay. A lot of genre has overlap, so that's good. It's up to the scholars to argue why it's horror or not.
Right. I mean, so like you can have Westerns combined with horror, like Bone Tomahawk.
Yeah.
You know, you can have, you know, in musical horror,
maybe
like Cabaret.
Yeah, true. True.
But since you mentioned Get Out, can you just answer this one question, which is why was it sometimes categorized as comedy?
It's very funny.
Oh, no, but you know, I think you're talking about what happened with the Golden Globes, which, by the way, is an organization that has 0 Black participation. So you need to know that from the outset. And they also have some very unusual categories, so that even Jordan Peele at the time, the only category that seemed to fit was musical or comedy, because if you put it in drama, then you're up against all the big heavy Oscar contenders.
I think they were trying to give it an award.
They were trying to figure out how to categorize it. And then Jordan Peele went publicly and realized, you know, this is not a comedy, it's a documentary. Remember that? Get Out is a documentary. That was what that tweet was in reaction to. But anyone who calls Get Out a comedy, mostly it's just because there's some funny lines. But that Golden Globes thing was just a snafu that had to do with categorization.
You know, I would say that Get Out, that the comedy in Get Out is more than the funny lines. If you take a look at the comedy sketches on Key and Peele, you will see that there are a number of them that would have been very easy for them to turn that towards real horror. You know, that they would use comedy to laugh and release the tension. But structurally, they were playing some pretty nasty games sometimes, and brilliant games. You know, I never saw Jordan coming, but now that I see what he is, I can go back to Key and Peele and say, oh, I should have paid attention. You know?
I think if you want to distinguish it as comedy, you would look at it like, are the situations funny, right? Is it a funny moment when Chris appears at the house and then something funny happens? But there are definitely elements of comedy and horror in Get Out, and he's a master of both.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so sorry that we couldn't get to all the questions. We do have to end here. This has been a rich and fulfilling discussion. And as one of my colleagues text, it has been so many things: genre lecture, critical analysis, reading, craft talk, and more.
Hey,
thank you so very much.
Well, we're so honored to have had this time. Thank you so much for inviting us. And I really hope that your many participants enjoyed it.
There's nothing that I love more. There are only 3 things in life that I care about. I care about my family, I care about martial arts, and I care about writing and teaching. An opportunity to speak to my tribe, to speak to my community, honestly, and just say, that I have no words for how joyful an experience this is. And I wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart for trusting us to have this opportunity to speak to these young minds who have entrusted you with their growth.
Thank you. This has been amazing for us.
Thank you for
Thank you,
coming.
everybody. Thank you so much for inviting us.